Good afternoon, this is the Coconino National Forest, and I'm going to stop here in Red Rock Country to talk some anime.
Silent Mobius, the motion pictures.
Silent Mobius is a 1991 sci-fi anime movie based on a manga by Jii-san. The sequel was released within a year, and they're so closely tied together I'm going to talk about them both today. Silent Mobius is set in future Tokyo, a bleak place plagued by lethal acid rain and ugly demonic creatures called Lucifer Hawk. The latter come from an alternate dimension called Nemesis. The movie opens in 2028 as the demon-fighting women of the AMP, the attacked mystification police, converge on the site of a new space elevator where there seems to be a demonic infestation. Rally Cheyenne is the AMP's founder and boss, and she's recruited an assortment of different talents to her elite squad. Kitty, who has a partially cyborg body, plenty of guns, and lots of attitude. Nami, a traditional mystic protector fond of talismans and wards. Lebia, a clever computer hacker. Yuki, an esper. And finally, Katsumi Liqueur, a powerful sorceress that the movie is going to focus on. As the AMP women try to surround and confront the Lucifer Hawk, Katsumi ends up fighting it alone with her magic talking sword. Something about this particular Lucifer Hawk awakens a memory, and suddenly the story flashes back 4 years earlier to 2024, which is where most of this movie actually is set. Katsumi Liqueur is an ordinary young woman flying to Tokyo for the first time from Hawaii to visit her hospitalized mother. Katsumi doesn't know anything at this point about the AMP, the Lucifer Hawk, or that her mother is involved with the AMP and the Lucifer Hawk, or that Katsumi has a powerful heritage and an important destiny of her own. The AMP's leader, Rally Cheyenne, knows all this and wants to recruit Katsumi into the AMP. So Katsumi's going to have a rude awakening when she meets AMP Officer Kitty in a dark alley, along with a Lucifer Hawk.
So who are you? Nami, why are civilians wandering around this area?
What? What are you talking about?
I'm in no mood to play games.
Mom, why didn't you tell me? Well, this story belongs to one of those genres where people keep secrets from Katsumi for her own good. And because a lot of plot complications could be avoided with one good sit-down session. Director Kazuo Tomizawa structured the movie with that bracketing story about the full AMP team together and Katsumi's battle with the Lucifer Hawk in the space elevator, and telling the story of Katsumi's introduction to the AMP as a flashback within that context gave the movie some much-needed action and sense of unity and purpose up front. It needs it because in the flashback, Katsumi is in full-throated denial, and the AMP members, especially Rally and Kitty, aren't exactly friendly, welcoming, understanding, or informative. Kiya-Asamiya's manga has been translated into English and published in the US by Viz, though Viz couldn't resist changing the meaning of the AMP acronym, coloring a couple of the chapters, and making everybody left-handed, of course. The movie's trailer promised a cyber-psychic movie, but compared to the manga, the movie doesn't have the cyberpunkish feel. There's only a passing reference to the lethal acid rain or any other aspect of the larger setting, nor is there much in the way of computers or cyber hacking. The movie also skimps on the background. I think if you didn't already know Kitty was half cyborg, the first movie wasn't going to clue you in on that. You'd just think she was awfully strong. It's going to leave Katsumi's departed father, Gig Elf, a complete mystery here. Nor is it going to explain anything about that sword, Gross Polliner, that Katsumi wields in the opening sequence. Ordinarily, you wouldn't expect everything like that to be explained, but in the flashback sequence, Katsumi clearly doesn't have a sword, so one wonders, where does it come from later? In 50 minutes, the movie can only do so much, I suppose, but if you're not already familiar with the Silent Mobius universe, I think you're going to leave with a lot of questions. I wasn't happy with character designs. The ladies seemed too blocky, broad-shouldered, and angular, except in Katsumi's sour scene where she's got all the right curves. The AMP uniforms with cape and epaulets don't help. The action scenes are pretty well animated, but although this is technically a theatrical movie, AIC's animation is really more typical of one of their OVAs of the time period, such as one of the later Bubblegum Crisis OVAs, Soul Bianca, or the first Tenchi Muyo series. This movie has been dubbed into English twice, first by Streamline Pictures and later by Ocean Studios. The recent Bandai re-release uses the Ocean Studio dub, which is the better of the two. It isn't bad, at least for the main characters. I'm still more familiar with the Japanese voices from my old Laserdisc, so I still prefer that myself. The music is by Koro Wada, who's also provided the scores for many other animes such as Sazan Eyes, Battle Angel, and Samurai 7. The music here is at its best when accompanying spell recitals, a sort of chant with a slightly modern beat. It sort of reminded me of Orff's Camino Burana. On the whole, I give the first Silent Mobius movie 3.5 stars, which is an average of 4 stars for fans of the manga and 3 stars for the uninitiated who are going to be bewildered. It's a solid animated companion to the larger Silent Mobius story, but I'm not convinced it works as well as a first exposure to the AMP.
And now let's take a look at the sequel.
The Silent Mobius sequel, imaginatively titled Silent Mobius 2, came out a year later. It's a direct sequel to the inner flashback story of the first movie. Unlike its predecessor, it doesn't have a bracketing story. It's set entirely in 2024, before Katsumi joins the AMP and right after events in the first movie's first flashback. It's still mostly Katsumi's story as she struggles to face her destiny, not to mention the interest of the Lucifer Hawk. The second movie also reintroduces Yuki, an Esper who will also become an AMP member. Yuki was in the bracketing story of the first movie, but not in the longer flashback story, because in 2024 she was still a civilian and not a member of AMP. The second movie doesn't stand on its own, and it doesn't try to. You need to have seen the first movie beforehand. It also saves all the action for the end, making it a pretty slow start. I didn't find the second movie as entertaining as the first. As with the flashback sequence in the first movie, Katsumi spends the entire movie in angry denial of her situation. That may seem realistic. I'm sure I wouldn't care much for being pulled between an interdimensional demon and a gruff police force either. But she's not a pleasant character here, and neither of the unsympathetic, standoffish AMP officers who should be trying to recruit her. Yuki is the only cheerful one of the bunch, and she's not an AMP officer at this time.
私、なんとなくわかるんです。運命なんです、多分。私たちの出会いも。これからずっと同じ場所で仕事して。
それってまさか占いとか予言とか言うんじゃないんでしょうね。
私の勘っていうか、インスピレーションみたいなものだと。
私、そういうの嫌いよ。占いとか予言とか未来とか。
This movie has a different director, but the same writer, character designer, and music composer as the first, plus the same Japanese voice cast. In many ways, releasing these two movies as 50 and 55-minute movies is sort of a cheap, since they could easily be edited into a single full-length movie by just dropping the second movie at the end of the flashback sequence in the first. Both movies contain plenty of small references to backgrounds from the manga that aren't essential to the plot, but can appeal to fans of the manga without being intrusive for the uninitiated. For example, Police Officer Robert Device, a character from the manga, is seen briefly in the second movie. Bandai just re-released both movies in the US with the same old English dubs and subtitles, I'm afraid. Honestly, since both movies are under an hour in length, and since there weren't any new production costs, I'm not sure it was worth the price of 2 separate full-price DVDs, unless you're a really big fan of the manga, especially since the DVDs don't have any extras on them except the theatrical trailers. There's also a Silent Mobius TV series made several years later in 1998. Since that covers a lot more of the manga, seeing it first might actually enhance your appreciation of the earlier movies, but that's a talk for another hike.
Thanks for listening.